Russia finally thought it had figured out the first-person view, or FPV, drone problem. For most of the Ukraine war, these drones have been devastating Russia's tank columns. Not anymore, Russia thought. With its new tank, those drones wouldn't be able to do a thing. Russia was wrong. Somewhere in eastern Ukraine, a Russian tank column just discovered that its new tank isn't up to the job. Ukraine has just captured one of Vladimir Putin's experimental warfare tanks. Russia didn't want you to see what's inside. We now know plenty about what Ukraine managed to pull off. Interesting Engineering reported that several Ukrainian brigades worked together to take out a tank column en route to a strike in eastern Ukraine. The 60th Mechanized Brigade was involved, claims Interesting Engineering, as was Ukraine's 95th Brigade of the Air Assault Force and its dreaded Azov Brigade. Together, this trio of forces launched an FPV drone strike that managed to damage Russia's experimental tank enough that it could be captured. The Azov Brigade's Telegram channel provided more details. It says that the strike didn't just disable Russia's new tank. Dozens of Russian soldiers were also killed in the attack, though the new tank's crew, along with the drivers of other vehicles accompanying the tank, managed to escape. By the end of the strike, the modified Russian tank and a Russian BTR-82 armored personnel carrier were disabled and abandoned by the Russians. The strike was effective, and it gave Ukraine access to a new type of Russian tank, the modified Tsar. What do we know about this new version of the Tsar? Interesting Engineering provides the basics, reporting that the Tsar is actually a Russian T-72 main battle tank. This tank is notable in its own right. According to the Tank Museum, the T-72 is the most widely used main battle tank in the world, having been manufactured by 6 countries in its heyday and used by the armies of 35 nations. We use the term heyday because the T-72 is a Soviet-era tank that was developed during the Cold War era. It was built in the Soviet Union itself, as well as in Poland and the former Czechoslovakia, and it's still an impressive piece of machinery. The tank has a low profile and is crewed by 3 people. It's capable of reaching top speeds of 37 miles per hour, and it comes equipped with a host of weapons that make it a dangerous prospect. These include a 125mm smoothbore autoloader cannon, along with a 12.7mm anti-aircraft machine gun, and a 7.62mm machine gun designed for cutting down troops on the ground. Russia loved this tank so much that it built 25,000 of them during the Soviet era, the Tank Museum says. But by now, you're probably asking yourself a question: how is any of this new? The T-72 is an old tank for sure, and we've seen Russia deploy it constantly during Putin's invasion. However, it's not the tank itself that's remarkable here. Russia's experimental efforts to tackle the FPV were difficult to spot unless somebody got up close and personal with the tank. Putin never expected one of his new versions of the Tsar to fall into Ukraine's hands. He was wrong. And what Ukraine found strapped to the modified T-72 revealed that Russia is trying everything it can to tackle the FPV problem. The Warzone, or TWZ, provides more details in its article covering the tank captured back in April 2024. It reports that the new version of Russia's T-72 was loaded with an array of improvised electronic warfare capabilities, able to stop Ukraine's FPV drones in their tracks. Strapped to the tank's turret, says TWZ, were multiple boxes that it says are associated with counter-drone electronic warfare jamming equipment. Among these boxes were what appeared to be a phased array of some description. These arrays are computer-controlled collections of antennae, which allows for creation of an interference pattern that allows Russia to boost signal strength and essentially steer its radar in different directions without having to move the antenna themselves, says Keysight. Russia's experimental T-72 appears to have been using this system to provide 360-degree coverage of the area surrounding the tank. Why? To spot Ukraine's FPV drones. It was hardly the most professional of systems. TWZ says that Russia had loosely strapped all of its electronic warfare boxes together on the experimental tank's turret. A picture shared by the outlet shows the boxes crookedly sitting on top of a wooden pallet with rope wrapped around them, showing us that Russia's experimental tank certainly isn't going through any sort of pre-designed manufacturing process. Instead, it seems that some of Putin's mechanized units have come up with an idea and hashed together some electronic defenses as quickly as they could to guard against FPV drones. Ramshackle, the collection of electronic warfare systems may have been, but it was effective. That's according to Rob Lee, who posted to X in the wake of the experimental tank's capture. He shared several more pictures of Russia's experimental T-72, again showcasing just how loosely packed all of this equipment was to the tank's turret. But he also confirmed that the approach had been effective. The system reportedly was effectively countering a large number of FPVs operating with different frequencies before it was stopped, Lee says. TWZ adds that the tank was able to counter so many FPVs at once by using guidance systems operating on different frequencies, likely a capability made possible by the use of the previously mentioned phased array strapped to the T-72's turret. So Russia's experimental tank doesn't look like anything special. However, it can get the job done. It left many of Ukraine's FPV drones in the dust. That leads us to ask just how Ukraine managed to take down this drone killer tanker. The @Moklassen X account provides the details. It recounts the battle, stating that Russia sent a PDAR tank column in Ukraine's direction. As that column advanced, Ukraine managed to destroy most of the tanks, though the Tsar survived a little longer. The reason, it seems, is that most of Ukraine's FPV drones weren't able to get near it. We say most, and not all, for a reason. Per the Moklassen account, the experimental tank stopped only after being damaged by an FPV drone, damaged the fire control system, plus a tangle of wire was wound on the tracks, so it was difficult to control the equipment. An oversight in Russia's ramshackle design, perhaps. After all, strapping so much electronic warfare equipment to the modified T-72's turret must have reduced visibility significantly for the tank's operators. That reduction in visibility appears to have led the driver steering the tank over a huge spool of barbed wire, which got wrapped up in the tank's tracks to the point where it became impossible to control. Panic may have set in, and with that panic, an opening for one of Ukraine's FPV drones was created, allowing for the destruction of the tank's fire control system. Russia's experimental tank was finally disabled, but the job didn't end there. Though the tank had been abandoned by its crew, Ukraine knew it still needed to ensure that the modified T-72 didn't fall back into Russia's hands. Plus, it wanted to grab the tank for itself. Only by capturing it would they be able to discover what types of electronic warfare equipment the new T-72 was using and how to develop a counter. The Ukrainian troops waited until nightfall. They had to, because the tank lay only around 1,200 feet away from a known Russian position, says TWZ. Attempting to claim the tank during the day would leave Ukraine's soldiers exposed, opening the door for Russia to launch a renewed attack to take out the troops as they tried to claim the tank. So nighttime it was. Moklassen provides more of the details. The X account says that Ukraine deployed tankers from the Azov Brigade to gain control of the tank. It was not so easy, like jumping into a tank and off we went, says Moklassen. Instead, the Ukrainian crew first needed to unlock the hatch to the tank's driver's seat and repair some of the damage Ukraine had just done to Russia's FPV drone killer. The crew changed cylinders and batteries, said the X account, noting that just one of these batteries weighs around 154 pounds. Ideally, this would be the work of 3 people. Ukraine managed to pull it off with 2. With the cylinders and batteries installed, the Ukrainian crew had more work to do. They cut and pulled out the wire that was mined. Yes, there was a mine right under the tank, Moklassen reveals. It was during this initial repair attempt that Russia made its own effort to reclaim the stricken tank. The enemy even tried to break through to the tank on motorcycles, but all those races were zeroed, says Moklassen. Future provided a slightly different account of the brave operation in a June 3rd YouTube video. As night fell, some brave Ukrainian soldiers infiltrated there to try to evacuate the tank for detailed analysis, it says. They easily started the tank's engine and drove it toward their base. That appears to be an understatement of what happened. Perhaps Ukraine's tank crew made the reclamation look easy once they were inside the modified T-72, but the reality is that it took 2 nights of work to finally take the T-72. Regardless, the reclamation effort was successful. Ukraine captured Russia's modified T-72, but the ordeal didn't end there. According to TWZ, getting the T-72 back to the Ukrainian base was a little more troublesome than anybody had anticipated. Once Ukraine got the tank moving again, the new operator unfortunately ended up driving the T-72 into a ditch. The impact was severe enough that the new driver briefly lost consciousness. However, he recovered with the help of his comrades, and the irony of Ukraine's own defenses stopping it from taking Russia's modified tank was avoided. Here's why this matters. TWZ points out that Russia's experimental T-72 was likely a one-off. At best, it was some sort of test vehicle, with the sheer amount of jamming equipment strapped to its turret, suggesting that Putin's forces were going for a kitchen sink approach to their testing. Try everything at once and see what works. It appears the modified T-72 had been effective, but not so much that Ukraine couldn't stop it. The real headline here, says TWZ, is that the capture of the tank presented Ukraine with a significant windfall of equipment it may have otherwise never known existed. Examination of the modified T-72 will offer insight into how Russian counter-drone technology works, the outlet reports. And it's not just Ukraine that benefits from that information. Intelligence sharing has been a huge part of the Ukraine war, with Ukraine able to launch so many staunch defenses against Russia's attacks thanks to the information it's receiving from its allies. That intelligence sharing goes both ways. Everything that Ukraine has learned about Russia's electronic warfare systems thanks to this tank capture is going back to its allies. The US and Europe now know more about the interesting electronic warfare ecosystem Russia is attempting to deploy on the battlefield, as well as how that ecosystem is used. Learning more about Russia's anti-drone systems also matters. Why? Well, because Ukraine can use that information to continue its success against Putin's tanks. Future points this out by highlighting the role that the modified T-72 seemed to play in the column that Ukraine ultimately managed to destroy in eastern Ukraine. It says that Russia typically employs its anti-drone warfare systems on the leading tanks in a column. That makes sense, especially when deploying electronic warfare systems. That leading tank takes point, allowing it to disable any incoming FPV drones that attempt a frontal assault. In doing so, the lead tank is supposed to protect the rest of the column. It doesn't always work out that way for Russia. Ukraine's other anti-tank defenses, such as the barbed wire that ultimately spelled the demise of the T-72, are just as effective against Russia's other tanks. One wrong move within the column behind the lead tank can lead to a Russian vehicle being isolated, making it easy prey for an FPV drone. Plus, as we saw in April 2024, a T-72 loaded with electronic warfare equipment is just as susceptible to getting caught in Ukraine's barbed wire and mine traps. If that happens, the tank becomes vulnerable, even to the FPV drone strikes against which it's supposed to protect. Ukraine needs to know how to counter Russia's tanks for a simple reason. Putin is deploying a lot of them. By taking as many of Russia's tanks out as possible, Ukraine weakens Russia's ground assaults and relieves pressure on its brave defenders. Ukraine has already been doing a great job of destroying Russia's tanks. According to the country's Ministry of Finance, Ukraine has destroyed or disabled a staggering 10,927 Russian tanks as of June 11th. Other vehicles aren't safe from Ukraine's wrath either. Over 22,700 of Russia's armored fighting vehicles have become the victims of Ukraine's drones and anti-tank warfare, along with 51,579 of Russia's cars and fuel cisterns. Russia's goal has always been to protect these secondary vehicles with its tanks, which is what it was trying to do with its modified T-72. Ukraine has shown many times over that all of these efforts aren't working. Russia now finds itself in a position where it's almost run out of tanks to deploy in Ukraine. That's according to UA Wire, which reports that Russia's tank losses in May 2025 were lower than they've been at any other point during the war. This may seem to imply that Russia is getting better at protecting its tanks, perhaps thanks to the deployment of more modified T-72s. This isn't the case. The reduced losses are not due to conservation efforts, UA Wire reports, but simply because they are no longer available. The age of Russian tank dominance has come to an end. The resource reports that around 80% of Russia's tank storage facilities have been depleted as early as 2024. It also says that 75% of the T-62s Russia has lost in 2025 so far were simply updates of models seen in 2022, which also shows us that Russia seems to have abandoned the idea of building new tanks for the Ukraine war. Instead, UA Wire says that it's focusing on refurbishing older tanks to bring more of these powerful vehicles to the front lines faster. It's failing. Russia is refurbishing at a pace that critically fails to match frontline attrition. Ukraine wants to maintain that attrition rate, which brings us back to its destruction of Russia's modified T-72. The goal with this tank, and the others like it that are packed with electronic warfare equipment, is protection. The sheer volume of equipment packed onto the T-72 reduces its attacking threat due to the reduced visibility all of that equipment creates. The trade-off is that the modified tanks takes out Ukraine's FPV drones, which is supposed to allow Russia to conserve other tanks in the column. By capturing the modified T-72, Ukraine now knows exactly how to counter Russia's electronic warfare. The result will be even more tank losses for Russia as the war goes deeper into 2025. We're already seeing that, as UA Wire says. Russia is already deploying fewer tanks than ever, which means less pressure placed on Ukraine and more opportunities to repel Russia's waves and potentially launch counteroffensives into occupied territory. And of course, we can't ignore the impact of the weapon that Russia was trying to neutralize with its modified T-72 FPV drones. According to Army Technology, it's now believed that tactical attack drones, such as Ukraine's FPV drones, now account for between 70 and 80% of the daily combat losses both sides experience in the war. Let's put that into context. According to RBC Ukraine, Russia lost over 1,120 of its soldiers to death, injury, or capture between June 10th and June 11th. If drones are responsible for 80% of those casualties, that means the drones Russia is trying to counter with its modified T-72 took out 896 people. It's not just tanks that have to worry about Ukraine's FPV drone. Every Russian soldier deployed in Ukraine is a target, and it's only going to get worse for Russia. According to Forbes military analyst David Axe, Ukraine plans to manufacture a staggering 4.5 million drones by the end of 2025. Russia also understands how vital drone warfare has become to its Ukraine campaign, with Axe stating that Putin now has a target of building between 3 and 4 million drones by the end of the year, per the New York Times. In January, Forbes correspondent David Hambling also wrote that FPV drones are still Ukraine's biggest tank killer, which is more proof that Russia's experimental T-72 didn't achieve what Putin would have hoped. As Ukraine builds more FPV drones and equips them with jam-proof fiber optic guidance and AI target seeking, FPVs may become even more dominant in 2025, Hamblin concluded. He seems to have been right. And the creation of these new drone technologies also suggests that Ukraine's capture of Russia's modified T-72 may have served its intended purpose. After all, it's not too much of a stretch to suggest that the new anti-jamming systems Ukraine has been building into its FPV drones in 2025 were developed as a direct result of what Ukraine learned from capturing Russia's modified T-72 back in April 2024. Russia's attempts to defend its own tanks have been turned against it. The experimental T-72 was a failure. As the war moves deeper into 2025, look for Ukraine to deploy thousands of its FPV drones daily as it whittles away at the ever-diminishing tank stockpiles Putin has left. And it's not just drones in Ukraine that will be worrying Putin. Earlier in June, Ukraine launched a stunning drone attack on Russian soil in what it dubbed Operation Spiderweb. That attack was devastating for Putin and may serve as the foundation for his eventual unseating from his position as Russian president. Find out how in our video that covers why Putin was humiliated by Ukraine's Operation Spiderweb. And remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more videos covering the latest developments in the Ukraine war.